Hello, darlings. So today we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite topics, divination, and everything that goes into divination and where it comes from and. So divination comes from the Latin word divinare, which means to foresee or to be inspired by God. So you have your two schools of thought right there. The one is to be able to foresee the future, and the other one is that it's messages from God. And I suppose messages from God could also be being able to foresee something and predict the future. It depends entirely on the message that God gives you, I guess. Psychologist Julian Jaynes categorized divination into 4 different types. You've got your omens, your omen text, clairomancy, augury, and your spontaneous. Omens and omen text, the most well-known example of this is the Chinese and how they looked at the way the stars were aligning and what strange births there were and strange natural occurrences, and they compiled all this data into one big box, and from that they would predict outcomes of certain situations. And it was so part of their core belief that even the government used this divination on data to make long-term strategies. Clairomancy consists of casting lots, that is sticks, stones, bones, beans, coins, cards, any kind of item like that. That was under clairomancy. Then augury, this one gets a bit messy. The Romans in the classical times used what they call Etruscan methods, I think that's how you pronounce it, where they'd examine the livers of sacrificed animals. Dowsing falls under this, and watching, for instance, the flight of birds or the movement of animals, and they'd make divine messages from this. And at first you think to yourself, that's very funny, but what about when a rainstorm is coming and all the birds suddenly duck for cover? Wouldn't that count? Spontaneous basically covers all divination methods, but the one that made the biggest impact, if you could call it that, was bibliomancy. So you would ask a question and then page through your holy book, and wherever your paging stops, the first paragraph that catches your attention, that would be your message. Another one that falls under spontaneous, because it doesn't really fall under the others, is reading auras. And then the other one is feng shui, falls under this. There's one that doesn't seem to fall under any of these, and that is palmistry, also known as chiromancy chiromancy. It was used all over the place, and it was practiced by a gazillion different cultures: Indian, Tibet, China, Persia, Sumeria, Israel, Babylon. I mean, it was used everywhere. I'm pretty sure you know what palmistry is, but if you don't, it's reading the lines and bumps and little shapes that are on your hands. So that's just a basic overview of divination. I'm going to go into a bit of history. Most of this comes off of Wikipedia. In 332 BC, the Oracle of Amun at the Siwa Oasis was made famous by Alexander the Great. One of the great historical texts that we rely on for some information, the Bible, Deuteronomy 18:10-12 or Leviticus 19-26, can be interpreted as categorically forbidding divination. However, some will claim that divination is indeed practiced in the Bible, such as in Exodus 28 when the Urim and Thummim are mentioned. The method of casting lots was used in Joshua 14, 1-5 and Joshua 18, 1-10 to divide the conquered lands of Canaan between the 12 tribes. It's not so much seen as divination as it was done by what God wanted done, but I call that divination. With the ancient Greeks, they had both oracles and seers. Oracles were like this amazing group, but they had limited time, so they needed somebody to come in and do divination, but not on such a great level. So they had both oracles and seers. Oracles were conduits for the gods on earth. Their prophecies were understood to be the will of gods verbatim. Because of the high demand for oracle consultations and the oracle's limited work schedule, they were not the main source of divination for the ancient Greeks. That role fell to the seers. The disadvantage to seers was that only direct yes or no questions could be answered. Oracles could answer more generalized questions, and seers often had to perform several sacrifices in order to get the most consistent answer. For example, if a general wanted to know if the omens were proper for him to advance on the enemy, he would ask his seer both the questions, and if it were better for him to remain on the defensive. If the seer gave consistent answers, the advice was considered valid. In 692, the council in Turolo in the Eastern Orthodox Church passed canons to eliminate pagan and divination practices completely. We all saw that coming. In the Constitution of 1572 and public regulations of 1661 of Kur-Saxony, capital punishment was used on those predicting the future. I mean, that's not so long ago. 1572 and 1661, that was fairly recent history. Some of these laws forbidding divination practices are still in force today. Divination was a central component of ancient Mesoamerican religious life. Many Aztec gods, including central creator gods, were described as diviners and were closely associated with sorcery. Then you've got the Buddhists in Asia that have various different methods of doing this. And in Japan, there were divination methods including Futamani from the Shinto tradition. Go look up Futamani, it looks really cool. There's your homework for the week. Just joking. Okay, so there are lists and lists and lists of the different methods of divination. I'm going to put these all up for you, but I'm going to only read out a couple. Abocamancy, divination by dust. How cool is that? Then you've got Alveromancy by sounds. Menomancy by the placenta. That one's actually quite common in Africa as well, if I recall correctly. Apantomancy by chance encounters with animals. Astropomancy by lightning. I like this one. Batrachomancy by frogs. How the hell are you going to divine something by watching frogs? Robert. Chartomancy by things on paper. Taromancy, we all know what that is. And then we have I Ching from the Chinese. Cryomancy by ice. Demonomancy by demons. Okay. Aeromancy by water vessels exposed to air. I suppose if you've got things falling into it and making patterns, that would be a good way of doing it. This one tickles me. Floriography or floromancy by flowers' feelings. Hematomancy by blood. Hypnomancy by sleep. Yeah, I could do with that one. Then you've got Kabbalah. Mesomancy by nursing. Meteoromancy by meteors. Well, I suppose if one lands on your head, you're going to be able to see the future. Necromancy. There's a whole lot of information about that, which I'm not too clued up on, but it's divination by speaking to the dead or by corpses. Then we've got Ouija board. That's a whole nother debate on its own. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because I could just cheerfully carry on reading this whole list. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to help you learn a little bit about tarot if you don't already know. I found this story a long time ago and I can't actually remember where I found it or where I saw it, but it's absolutely awesome. It takes the Fool and it breaks down the major arcana into the lessons and the growth and the trials that the Fool goes through, and that Fool represents ourselves. So when you're going and doing a tarot reading, you pull one of these cards, it's easy to remember from the story what exactly that card symbolizes and shows us. Okay, so first card, the 0 card. The use of 0 as a card number is interesting because the number 0 only came about reasonably recently. So the use here is quite interesting. We begin with the Fool, a card of beginnings. The Fool stands for each of us as we begin our journey in life. He is a fool because only a simple soul has the innocent faith to undertake such a journey with all its hazards and pains. On setting out, the Fool immediately encounters the Magician and the High Priestess, the great balancing forces that make up the perceived world. It is a feature of the material universe that as soon as we name some aspects of experience, we automatically evoke its opposite. The Empress. As he grows, the Fool becomes more and more aware of his surroundings. As with most babies, he first recognizes his mother, the warm, loving woman who nourishes and cares for him. He also comes to know Mother Earth, who nurtures him in a larger sense. Then the next person the Fool encounters is the Father, in the figure of the Emperor, card number 4. He is that representative of structure and authority. As the baby leaves his mother's arms, he learns that there are patterns to his world. Objects respond in predictable ways that can be explored. The child experiences a new kind of pleasure that comes from discovering order. Kind of like that whole saying of, spare the rod, spoil the child. The Hierophant, card number 5. Eventually the Fool ventures out of his home into the wider world. He is exposed to beliefs and traditions of his culture and begins his formal education. The Hierophant, in some decks known as the Pope, represents the organized belief systems that begin to surround and inform the growing child. Eventually the Fool faces 2 new challenges. He experiences the powerful urge for sexual union with another person. Before, he was mainly self-centered. Now he feels the balancing tendency pictured in the lovers to reach out and become half of a loving partnership. He yearns for relationships. By the time the Fool becomes an adult, he has a strong identity and certain mastery over himself. The Chariot. Through discipline and willpower, he has developed an inner control which allows him to triumph over his environment. Strength. Over time, life presents the Fool with new challenges, some that cause suffering and disillusionment. He has many occasions to draw on the quality of strength. He is pressed to develop his courage and resolve and find the heart to keep going despite setbacks. The Fool also discovers the quiet attributes of patience and tolerance. Hermit. Sooner or later, the Fool is led to ask himself the age-old question, why? He becomes absorbed with the search for answers, not from an idle curiosity, but out of a deeply felt need to find out why people live, if only to suffer and die. The Hermit represents the need to find deeper truth. The Wheel of Fortune. After much soul-searching, the Fool begins to see how everything connects. He has a vision of the world's wondrous design, its intricate patterns and cycles. The Wheel of Fortune is a symbol of the mysterious universe, whose parts work together in harmony. When the Fool glimpses the beauty and the order of the world, if only briefly, he finds some of the answers he is seeking. Justice. The Fool must now decide what this vision means to him personally. He looks back over his life to trace the cause and effect, relationships that have brought him to this point. He takes responsibility for his past actions so that he can make amends and ensure a more honest course in the future. The demands of justice, card 11, must be served so that he can wipe the slate clean. Hanged Man. Undaunted, the Fool pushes on. He is determined to realize his vision, but he finds life is not so easily tamed. Sooner or later, he encounters his personal cross, an experience that seems too difficult to endure. This overwhelming challenge humbles him until he has no choice but to give up and let go. Death. The fool now begins to eliminate old habits and tired approaches. He cuts out non-essentials because he appreciates the basics of life. He goes through endings as he puts the outgrown aspects of his life behind him. The process may seem like dying, because it is the Death 13th card of his familiar self to allow for the growth of the new one. At times this inexorable change seems to be crushing the fool, but eventually he rises up to discover that death is not a permanent state. It is simply a transition to a new, more fulfilling way of life. The Devil. The fool has his health, peace of mind, and a graceful composure. What more could he need? On everyday terms, not much, but the fool is courageous and continues to pursue the deepest levels of his being. He soon comes face to face with the devil. Tower, one of my favorite cards. How can the fool free himself from the devil? Can he root out his influence? The fool may only find release through the sudden change represented by the tower. The tower is the ego fortress each of us has built around his beautiful inner core. Grey, cold, and rock hard, the fortress seems to protect, but is only a prison. Star. The fool is suffused with this serene calm. The beautiful images of the star card attest to this tranquility. The woman pictured on card 17 is naked, her soul no longer hidden by any disguise. Radiant stars shine in a cloudless sky, serving as a beacon of hope and inspiration. The moon. What effect could spoil this perfect calm? Is there another challenge for the fool? In fact, it is his bliss that makes him vulnerable to the illusions of the moon, card number 18. The fool's joy is a feeling state. His positive emotions are not yet subject to mental clarity. The sun. It is the lucid clarity of the sun, card 19, that directs the fool's imagination. The sun's illumination shines in all hidden places. It dispels the clouds of confusion and fear. It enlightens, so the fool both feels and understands the goodness of the world. Temperance. Since embracing the hermit, the fool has swung wildly back and forth on an emotional pendulum. Now he realizes the balancing stability of temperance. He discovers true poise and equilibrium. By experiencing the extremes, he has come to appreciate moderation. Judgment. The fool has been reborn. His false ego self has been shed, allowing his radiant true self to manifest. He has discovered that joy, not fear, is at life's center. It is time for the fool to make a deeper judgment, card number 20, about his life. His own personal day of reckoning has arrived. Since he now sees himself truly, he can make the necessary decisions about the future. He can choose wisely which values to cherish and which to discard. And then finally, the World card. So the fool's journey was not so foolish after all. Through perseverance and honesty, he reestablishes the spontaneous courage that felt impelled on him on his search for self. But now he is fully aware of his place in the world. This cycle is over, but the fool will never stop growing. Soon he will be ready to begin a new journey that will lead him to even greater levels of understanding. I hope that you found that interesting. I absolutely love it. And I've used it several times when I'm doing a tarot reading and it's like, what does this card mean? And then I think back of the story and it's like, it's a magician. Okay, so it was part of his initial way of facing the world, and it was to do with his magic and his power, and how this was just the beginning for him. So that can all pull through to your tarot reading, which is really cool. It just gives you another way of looking at your tarot cards instead of just the good old look at the tarot cards. Any case, that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Blessings have been given, blessings have been received. May the love of the Lord and Lady remain forever in our hearts. So mote it be.